So the purpose of this video is just to let you have a way to check your answers and see if you are getting this skill of graphing sine and cosine waves down pretty well. Now we also added in the last video how to write equations from a graph. We're not going to review that too heavily in this video, but I might make reference to it depending on time. So for each one of these, I'm just going to have you just start it. I'll maybe write it a little bit differently to help you get started, but then you'll pause your video, do your work, and then you can come back and check and see how it went. So the first thing before you get started on any of these is you're going to want to make sure that you factor out your b value. So this is just a way to see things a little bit easier. If I take out a 2/3 pi x over 3, if I take out the 2/3 pi, I can view it instead like this. Just might be a little bit easier to start graphing. So we just need one period. Go ahead and list all your important information, graph your graph, and we will compare in just a minute. Go ahead and pause your video. All right, check it, see how it went. Double check the period because we have this 2 pi over 3, so we're going to multiply by a reciprocal. The 2 pi's cancel out and you're left with just 3, which is fine. We can measure radians just as 3 radians, right? That'd be just close to the 180-degree reference mark, okay? But radians without pi's in them are totally okay. Okay, next one. I'm going to help you just write this so you can see it a little bit better. Right, think about that as pi over 6 times x. Whenever you're ready, go ahead and pause your video, and then you can come back, check and see if your work matches mine. Check it out, see how it went. Again, that period 2 pi divided by pi over 6, we're going to multiply by a reciprocal. Pi's will cancel out, we get a period of 12. That actually makes our intervals kind of nice. We're just counting by 3s, that's pretty quick. And no horizontal or vertical shift for this one, but we did have a flip or a reflection of the cosine graph. So we should be starting at the low amplitude instead of the high amplitude at our start value. All right, let's look at this one. Again, help you get started just by writing it in our form. The only thing these have in common is a 1, so I'm going to factor that out. Did that really change anything? Nope, but it might just help you to see it a little bit better. Your turn. Go ahead and pause it. Try it on your own. Come back and check. So this one we threw in the horizontal shift to the left pi. So I've got my starting value here. And then I showed the work down here for how I counted my intervals. So I started at negative pi, and then I had to add, that should say pi over 2. My apologies. I added pi over 2, which got me to negative pi over 2. So then I'm at negative pi over 2. I need to add another pi over 2. So now I'm at 0. I actually have a tick mark at 0, which is why I have one of my 5 key points on that value. 0 plus pi over 2 is pi over 2. Then the next tick mark, pi over 2 plus pi over 2 is pi. All right, next one, again, I'll help you get started just by thinking about how to look at this. So we don't usually have our d value out in front. You can leave it there if you want. I'm going to just choose to rewrite this as 5 cosine pi over 12x minus 3, right? Because I can either take minus 3 and add stuff or take all that stuff and then subtract 3. Just might help you see your vertical shift a little bit better. So go ahead and pause your video. Come back whenever you're ready. All right, so here's my graph for this one. I want to show you my information that I got. The amplitude was 5, period of 24, horizontal shift of 0, vertical shift down 3. My intervals I was counting by 6s, and there was no flip. So this one I just want to point out, I started by drawing my midline. Then I counted my amplitude up 5 and down 5. Now I was already starting at negative 3. So when I go up 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, my highest point is only 2. When I start at negative 3 and I go down 5, my lowest point is at negative 8. So then when I count my intervals this way, I start at 0, count 6, 12, 18, 24. This did not have a flip, so I know I need to start at my maximum, which was 2. Then at my next tick mark, I need to cross the midline. I'm not crossing the x-axis, I'm crossing the midline. Then the lowest or the minimum value, back to the midline, back to the highest. All right, this looks like I've got some funky numbers in here. I'm going to rewrite this just with my horizontal shift, my vertical shift rearranged, and my b value factored out, not that it really is going to make a difference here, just if that helps you to see it, plus 2. All right, go ahead and try it. Come back when you're ready. All right, some interesting numbers here. We end up with a period of 1/30th. Well, if we think about that, 60 pi is over 180. We're trying to get 180 loops of cosine in a regular period of 2 pi. It's a lot of loops. That's a really big accordion shrink in, right? Pretty tight cosine graph. But because we have the ability to pick how we label our axis, just like science class, it still looks relatively normal. But if you think about where on this x-axis is 2 pi, it is way far away, and we are having 60 pi of these squiggles by the time we get to that 2 pi mark. That's a lot. The amplitude is only 1/10, so from 2, my vertical shift, this would be 20 tenths, so this would be 21 tenths and 19 tenths. And then counting along the x-axis, I'm counting by 1/120th. So this is one of them, this is 2 of them, simplifies, 3 of them, simplifies, 4 of them, simplifies, and if you notice, our period was supposed to be 1/30, and I am ending there. Cosine starts at its high amplitude maximum, crosses the midline, low amplitude minimum, crosses the midline, back to its maximum. All right, this one again, I'm going to help you get started. So y equals 2/3 sine. I'm going to factor out this 1/2. So now I have x. If I do pi over 4 divided by 1/2 to factor it out, I end up with minus pi over 2. And you can quick check that. Dividing is multiplying by the reciprocal. Or if you multiply this back in, we get 1/2 times pi over 2, which is pi over 4. All right, go ahead and pause your video, try it, and come back when you're ready. All right, take a look, see what you think, see how it went. This right here, I just want to show you, we start at pi over 2, and then I'm going to add pi. So adding pi, I would need a common denominator, which would be 2. So I'm starting at pi over 2 and adding 2 pi over 2, which gets me to my next tick mark of 3 pi over 2. Well, from there, then I just can count 2 more of them, right? So this was 3, 5, 7, 9. But what you'll notice is if you start at 9 pi over 2, and we travel the distance back to pi over 2, we end up with 8 pi over 2, which was our period of 4 pi, just like we wanted it to be. All right, we're cruising. I'm going to help you get this one started. I'm going to factor out 2 pi. So if I have pi over 2 divided by 2 pi, that's the same thing as multiplying by 1 over 2 pi. Pi's are going to cancel, and this will be minus 1/4. You can check that by, again, multiplying in the 2 pi. We would get 2 pi over 4, which is pi over 2. All right, your turn. Go for it. So we start over 1/4, and then we add 1/4, another fourth, another fourth, another fourth. Vertical shift up 1 is my midline, and then up 1 and down 1 respectively from there. This one seemed to be okay. Hopefully it went okay for you as well. And we're ready for our last one. I'll help you get started. And take out this pi over 10. So if I do pi divided by pi over 10, multiplied by a reciprocal, it's going to be x minus 10 minus 1. All right, last one for you to try, and we'll come back and compare. So this one, we ended up with a period of 20, which where I ended, 1 rotation, 30 minus 10 is a period of 20. Counting by 5s, there was no flip. Started on the midline, high amplitude, midline, low amplitude, back to the midline for sine. So I want to connect real quick and talk about this as if it were a cosine wave. So if I had started here and run through this as a cosine equation, just so we practice this skill a little bit. So my midline was at -1. my amplitude was 2. My horizontal shift was 15. And the period was 20. So that's going to equal 2 pi over b. I could go ahead and do 20b equals 2 pi. B then equals 2 pi over 20, which is really pi over 10. And I could write this same exact wave as a cosine graph instead of a sine graph. Okay, so just a reminder that we do have that skill. That's it. Hopefully that was some good practice for you. If you need more, there's plenty more that we can practice. But that was really just to kind of build those skills. So if you're still struggling, if any of those didn't go okay, make sure you ask about them in class. But otherwise, hopefully that was just some good practice, making sure that we are ready to go.